Today is June 24th, 2004. This is Carol Darwell. We're at the office of Tom DeWitt in Roscommon, Michigan, for the purpose of hearing a recording of his family history. So, Tom, we'll start with asking you to make a statement that this paper belongs to the Roscommon Area Historical Society.
This tape belongs to the Roscommon Historical Society.
Okay, thank you. Right. Okay. Well, let's start with your mother and dad. Tell me where they were born and raised and their names.
Well, my dad was born in Pennsylvania and moved to Michigan after the 8th grade.
So what year was he born?
1874.
1894, this was.
1894, I'm sorry.
Okay. And his full name was William Leroy DeWitt, right?
William Leroy, but he was always known as Roy.
Okay. Were his parents immigrant to America then? Or how far back?
I'm not really sure.
Okay.
I mean, there's no natives here. So they came sometime.
Yeah. And your mother's maiden name?
Pulaski, and she was born in Richmond, Michigan, to John and Catherine Pulaski, and then Grandpa Pulaski moved to Pontiac and started meat markets, and my dad went to work for him when he got to Pontiac and met my mother and married his boss's daughter.
Good move.
Good move. He was lucky.
Then, was he from a large family?
He had one sister, one brother.
Did they stay
Two
in
sisters.
Pennsylvania, or did
No, they
They
were
all
all
came
in
to
Michigan. They all ended up here. His brother was Audrey Fox's dad. Do you know Audrey? He was our plumber, worked for Dad as a plumber.
What was his brother's name?
Charles.
Charles DeWitt.
And then he had a sister that lived in Luzerne, died in Luzerne, and
Did she raise a large family also?
no.
No. Did the brother
My
raise a
mother,
large family?
my mother's the one that had
Yeah,
the
that
big
was it.
family.
How many children did Charles DeWitt have?
3.
Three. So you didn't have that many cousins. You were the cousins. You were big.
No, we had a lot of cousins because there was a lot of family, but
Then how many brothers and sisters did your mother have?
my mother had 2 sisters and a brother.
And were they in Pontiac area also then?
They mostly ended up in the Flint area and stuff to start with, and then California, and I think that because they're all deceased now.
Sure. Did her parents immigrate
Yes, they were
Europe?
Polish.
from Poland?
When I'm not sure, but they'd been here a lot of years.
Yeah.
When
And they became as young people, you think?
I would think so.
Yeah. So your mother was born your mother was born in Richmond, you said, so they were already in Michigan
Right.
by the time she was born. What year was she born?
Oh, about 98.
1898.
Yeah.
Okay.
There was a
Okay, so they met in Pontiac and got married. And Tom has written a nice history here already prepared for us, which is quite wonderful. But anyway, we're going to try and embellish it, I guess might be the word. So go ahead and tell us about the 11 children. Were they all
Well,
born in Pontiac?
Yes. All born at St. Joseph Hospital in Pontiac. My brother Bill, who was the oldest, was born in 1916, and then had a sister Ruth right after that, and then sister Catherine, and then a sister Mary Ann, and then a brother Jim, who was killed in World War II, and then a sister Dorothy, And then my brother Bob, who lives on Pioneer Hill now. And then Roy Jr.,
Oh, way down there, number 8.
who
Roy Jr.
who drowned as about a 2-year-old in the lake that we lived on in Pontiac.
No, brilliant.
And then I was born shortly after he died in '34, and then my brother Jerry, who lives at Fox Run, was a year after me, and then my brother John was the baby of the family. Yeah,
Nice family. What little lake were you on in Pontiac?
Crescent Lake.
Crescent Lake.
It was a mud hole compared to Higgins Lake.
I imagine so. Was your little brother buried there then, probably?
Yes, yeah. He's up here now.
Oh.
Everybody, the whole family, they had a plot where the grandma and the grandpas were at and whatever in Pontiac. And they had a memorial.
Your mother's parents and your dad's parents?
Right.
Oh.
And then they had a memorial thing for my brother Jim. They never did find his body.
The one who died in the war.
War.
Where was he when he died?
On the north side of Japan in a submarine.
Oh. Wow.
His captain was ordered not that they weren't to make this last trip from Hawaii to Japan, and his captain wanted another kill, and they got killed. So that was an unfortunate thing. I've got some history on that.
So everyone in the submarine perished?
Yep. They never. I don't think they ever found any remains. They just know that that's where it happened.
Wow. Isn't that sad?
That's terrible.
Was it near the end of the war?
4 days.
Wow, it's sad, isn't it? It'd be hard for your family.
When Dad heard that and came home, and then they were talking about how the war was getting over, he threw the radio right out through the window.
Yeah, you have to do something.
President Roosevelt was on there telling how good job he'd done. The old man was so mad he just flung that radio right through the glass.
So how old was your brother when he died? Was he still single?
No, he'd gotten married. I would imagine he's 21, something like that. Had a hard time getting in the submarine service because he was 6'2", and they wouldn't take over 6 foot tall people in the service because there's no headroom in those things. But he got married at New London, Connecticut just before he shipped out, and his wife had a baby. Now she lives in Manistee, married a state policeman.
The child of Jim?
Yeah.
The daughter. What's her name?
Susan, and they had 8 children.
Susan
I
DeWitt.
think that's the next biggest family. She was a very good Catholic also.
Well, nice. Wow. Well, that was something for your family to go through that death, though.
It wasn't easy.
No, I'm sure it wasn't.
Yeah, I can remember stopping at the store after school. We always had to walk down to the store. And the old man was having a fit. I mean, he'd just gotten the telegram, and not a
pretty sight.
not a good place to be around him for a while.
How'd your mother handle it?
My mother wasn't as emotional as he was. She'd already lost another son, and to tell you the truth, I don't ever remember much of that. I just remember that my dad went on a rampage.
Yeah, sure. Well, you have to do something. Well, okay, tell us more about the store in Pontiac. How he got there.
Well, when he got to town, he went there as a grocery bagger and delivery boy. Back then they delivered a lot of groceries.
Okay.
And then he started working in the back room in the butcher shop and behind the counter, and he liked butchering, and he didn't feel that his ma was the best businessman in the world anyhow, and so he started buying. Grandpa Pulaski had like 2 or 3 stores, but
Oh,
they kind of combined them and went into one on South Saginaw Street in Pontiac.
oh.
And so then it just,
Did Grandpa combine it or your dad did?
I think Dad did.
Yeah.
Uh,
So he bought the meat market from your father-in-law.
right,
Says in about 1920.
probably.
What year were they married?
It was before 1916 because my brother
Bill was
Jim was born then, so probably they weren't very old, really. 20 years old or something.
Yeah, well, he would have been 16. He would have been 22.
Yeah.
Like that.
Mother was probably only 18 or 19.
Sure. She was. It's a young thing.
In that day and age, people got married
Oh,
younger
they sure-
anyhow.
They sure did. Okay.
But
And so he arrived in Pontiac by hitching a ride on the railroad
right,
from Pennsylvania.
yes.
Wonder how he picked Pontiac to get off.
Well,
Did he have a destination when did he know he was going there?
I think that he had
Connections.
some family. In fact, I don't know when his mother and father showed up in Pontiac, but I think they might have been here then. I'm not sure.
Oh.
My older brothers might. Well, Bob's the only. My sister Ruth would know.
Yeah.
she knows everything about our family, but she's in Grand Rapids.
Uh-huh.
Uh,
Okay, well, then go ahead and tell us about him coming to Roscommon.
well, he met Percy Legg in Pontiac, and Percy was a butcher also. And how they were friends, I'm not sure how it started, but they had a hunting camp and
The
came up.
Lakes did,
Well,
or together? Did.
together they did.
Oh, okay.
And in fact, it's out on 144. It was called Carson's Cook Shack, and that was their hunting camp. And so he had his up north connection that way. And then Percy Legg talked him into buying a log cabin from the Roscommon Log Cabin Company, and so he did that and had a cottage on Higgins Lake then.
That was what year about? That was about 34.
34.
Okay.
And then in 35 he bought the Roscommon Log Cabin Company and moved it to this property.
Where did it start?
Started on Lancewood Drive over
Oh,
just a quarter of a mile from
from the highway?
the highway down that road someplace.
Oh,
It was on the river side of the road. That's all I was ever told.
maybe it's about where Dave Dory lives now, huh?
Probably a little bit past that, I think, but I'm not exactly sure.
So this property is, what is this called anymore? Is this called Old 76?
This is Old 76.
Okay.
At one time, I think this was US 27. I think US 27 came through Prudenville, down through here, and went up that way.
Right.
Then they put it on the other side of Higgins Lake, and then this became 76, because there was no road from here to St. Helen at that time.
Oh, okay.
You had to go through Prudenville to get back to St. Helen,
Oh.
or out through Keno Corners that way around. There was no, this 76 between here and here in St. Helen was not
Relatively
here.
new, huh? So how
Probably
many acres did he have here to establish this?
100 acres started with.
100 acres. Wow.
But somehow or another, the Rutledge family was involved with this property. I'm not exactly sure. I haven't done I saw a title search once, but
So when he moved the company here, away from the river, then what did he start with?
just some old sheds and, a real basic, little tiny log cabin office. And then I think mostly what they salvaged from because they'd had a fire on the river thing. It was the machinery and the idea. And
Is
then,
that why they moved it? Because there had been a fire?
yeah, and the death of Dave Doherty's dad. I mean, it was just, they'd had enough. And Dad still remained friends with the ex-owner and whatever, and used his knowledge to build it back up. And then at that time, he still maintained his residence in Pontiac and had his market and whatever, but had a couple guys here managing it for him. And then,
Do you remember who they were?
yeah, one was Ralph Brackett. He was his office manager and architect, so to speak. Ralph had a lot of family in Grayling. And in fact, he ended up living next door to us in a log cabin that Dad built for him in Pontiac. So he was our neighbors down there. We grew up with his two boys. So they had a good relationship.
So about you mentioned previously that he built a lot of log cabins in the Pontiac area.
Well, because his main sales office was out of his store down there. And,
So you hauled the stuff from here down there?
oh yes.
Oh, okay.
And so, I mean, it was just a great market because those lakes were starting to develop as vacation. And these are strict, log cabins basically is a vacation home. People, and you don't, log cabins aren't built, they're not a subdivision type house. Every house that we've ever built, every log cabin we ever built, I mean, it was in the boondocks, which is where a log cabin should be, because that's it's rustic, and it should be in a rustic setting, not in a subdivision.
Did they start as round logs? Because later they were always square ones, weren't they?
No, it was, well, we did go into timber construction, but the log cabin round log was the mainstay. And then actually timber started getting harder and harder to find locally to turn the logs.
What the source was for all this?
He bought a number of pieces of property himself, and then the state always had sales, and it was all jack pine logs.
Oh.
And they turned the best. Basically what we did, we had crews in the woods that cut logs all summer, all winter for us. And then, of course, the logs were frozen, the sap was down. All of these were ideal situations for the long life of a log. And then they would come in here basically frozen, turned on a lathe, air dried for a year in a shed and out back, and then processed through. So everything that went out of here was at least a year old air dried. So it worked.
It's a big operation.
It was well, we had to maintain cutter sheds, and we moved shacks all over for cutters to live in, and
Like how many
skidded
people
it with
did
horses.
you
And
employ? Must have employed a fair number of people.
probably if you took in consideration all the people that were support people in the woods and with the sawmill and the manufacturing part of the mill, it probably ran 30 people or something.
So they had work year round, because in the winter.
Yeah, pretty much. Some people, he tried very, very hard not to lay people off. He'd find something to do, and that's why some of these projects came about, is to keep his people busy. So, and he used to set up accounts in the grocery stores and stuff for his men to make sure that they had enough, and that, in fact, he wouldn't pay some of them a whole paycheck because they'd stop at the bar on the way home. So they had an account. I know at Mel McCutcheon's Market, they had an open account for certain people that the only way they could get it was to buy groceries to feed their family.
Smart move, a little social work there.
Yep. Same with the
Sure.
clothing store, McConkey's clothing store. He had an account there, and so if the kids needed clothes, they could get that, and then
So he started this in 35, it says.
yes.
Wow. And that went till, how many years later?
Well, I bought, my brother Bill and my brother Bob and I bought Dad out in 1963,
Oh,
and then I bought Bob and Bill out in like 70, 72, and in about 1970 or someplace in that era is when the energy code came in to effect, and the log cabins did not qualify as an energy efficient house.
oh.
Basically because the people that made the standard didn't understand wood, and we lobbied as a log cabin association with a number of other log cabin companies, and finally got them to realize that wood is probably the best insulation thing in the world. The detail on that is too technical to get into, but they screwed up, but they really almost killed the log cabin industry for a period of time there,
Yeah.
until they finally did realize their mistake. But we were pretty well shut down for a couple of years when we were going gangbusters.
Wow. In the 70s.
Right. So I basically quit as much log cabin building probably in 70, and went to custom builders, and we were pioneer custom builders then for a long time, where we could build a subdivision type home, and stay a lot closer to home. To keep we advertised the log cabin company in like Field and Stream and Outdoors and magazine and a couple other magazines, and we've built log cabins in 36 states.
Okay.
And we always delivered and erected our part of the log cabin package to everyone.
Wow. That's
In
quite
fact,
a feat.
my dad took, we sent one big lodge, like the size of Pioneer Hill Lodge, or this office really, also. It's the same kind of a floor plan. By railroad car to Ogden, Utah, and then Dad took, I think, 3 other guys or 4 guys with him in his car, drove out there, and they erected that thing. So
Have you
that's,
gone to see it? Have you been there?
every once in a while I get a card from them,
Oh, do you?
and it hasn't been for 5 or 6 years probably, but I'd get a Christmas card saying, your cabin is still here, and then a picture of the cabin.
Oh, neat. 36 states, that's wonderful.
Yes, that's a lot of driving.
Yeah.
I've personally built in probably 30 of them.
No kidding.
I mean, that was my job for years and years, as I did the delivery and
Oh, okay.
construction stuff, and
Oh,
that's kind of got old after a while too, as the traffic got bigger, and it was.
sure.
We in Maine, Florida, Texas, North and South Dakotas,
Just right here from Little Roscommon.
right here.
Yeah,
We got the Midwest, and the eastern stuff is pretty well every state, I think.
Yeah, I imagine so. Wow, so when did the building part of it did you actually end that business?
I kind of quit the building business totally in like 85,
Oh, okay. So,
and got involved in a number of other things, and the last log cabin I built was that one we tore down on Higgins Lake and moved to Cedarville, and rebuilt
okay.
that up there, and that was in 88 and probably 87, 88, and 89. It was just kind of a do it when you had time stuff. It was a lot of fun to do it, go back to work again in the log cabin
Yeah.
business.
Well, let's get back to your place on Higgins Lake, where your family eventually moved to. too.
Yes.
Now, did you go to high school in Pontiac then? Or did you
No,
finish school?
I moved here in the 6th grade. And
Okay,
I
so
was
what year did
I
your
was the
family move here?
youngest of the three. I was the oldest of the three that were still at
Yes.
home.
Oh, okay.
And so that was 1945. Came here,
Okay.
entered into the 6th grade, and we left.
Did your father actually sell his business in Pontiac at that time?
No, but he pretty much. My brother and a brother-in-law ran it for like another 5 or 6 years after that, and then he got rid of it.
So 45 is when your family actually moved here,
Yes,
and they moved to the place on the lake
right.
at the end of,
By DeWitt Landing at the end of Burdell, right.
okay, on the east shore.
hmm
Okay, tell us about that place a little bit.
I mean, it was rustic. It was neat. They had there was quite a few bedrooms in it, and they were small bedrooms back then. And they were some of the bedrooms had log partitions in between, but then some of them had just a 3/4 inch wooden board screening, vertical.
Oh, vertical.
And some of those were cedar boards, and some of the knots fell out of those cedar boards, and every once in a while you could see a eye peeking through a knot hole checking you out.
Now, was there electricity there at that time?
Yes, but electricity went out a lot. We never did get rid of the wooden cook stove. My mother still had a wooden cook stove, and every time that the electricity went out, we had, which at that time, in the wintertime, there would only be from Flag Point to Andy Price's old house is where Layman's lived. There was only like 5 neighbors all winter. And so they'd all be at our house to use the wooden cook stove, to, you know. And my mother had I think it was a Maytag wash machine with a gasoline motor on it, and it was a kickstart thing that had a kick thing, and she'd go out there and kick on that job, and away we'd go. And we came here during the war from Pontiac, back and forth in the summer. We'd have 2 flat tires almost every time coming up in Pontiac, which was almost an 8-hour trip back then, because the roads were not like they are today by a long ways. And besides that, there was a 35-mile-an-hour speed limit for a lot of years. And she could, I mean, she'd just jump out and change that tire, and away we'd go again. But that house served very well, and a beautiful piece of property.
So you came to that home for summertime before you moved in
yes.
permanently.
Right. So, but it wasn't that big of a transition for us,
Right.
And it gave Dad an opportunity to be more involved in hands-on with the log cabin company. Then he took that log cabin, and after he got in the building business, and it had to be, he built a house around that log cabin out of timbers and masonry and whatever, and put a higher roof on it and whatever, and then tore down. We still lived inside of that log cabin, and he had this house all the way around it. Then we tore down that log cabin from the inside, and it was, now talk about engineering. That was quite an operation.
I guess so.
He built an addition on first, and then, of course, so that was kitchen, and so that was pretty stable. But the bedroom area and that area over there was hectic.
Wow. Was there a basement under the new part?
Under the new part, but that's all. The rest of it was on a slab.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. Who owns that now? Is it still in your family?
What's his name? Cooper?
So it's not in your family anymore?
No. Frank Cooper and his family. Frank was the equalization director in Roscommon County for a couple years, few years, I'm not sure how long. Then he and his wife bought that along with their daughter and son-in-law.
How long ago was that? Since your father died?
Oh yes.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, you couldn't have dragged him out of there until we carried him out. So it had to be 85 or something like that.
So your family, none of you moved into it when your father died?
No, nobody. We offered it to everybody. It was at that time thought that it was an expensive piece of property. Today, what we got for it and what you get today is ridiculous. But everybody was pretty well satisfied where they were at.
Okay, well, let's move on. Tell us about his involvement with the bank.
Well, when he started banking here, it was kind of or at least he felt it was, kind of run by the seat of their pants. And so he somehow got on the board of directors. I'm not sure how that takes place or took place at that time. And again, things weren't going like he thought they should, so he talked Percy Lehman to come in here, who was a more sophisticated banker from being involved with the Pontiac State Bank, and was a little more modern processing and whatever, to come up here and as head cashier basically was the manager, the operating manager for the bank.
Oh.
And then of course Percy went on to become the president and chairman of the board. And
Okay, so then, so how did he happen to start the Pioneer Hills? And tell me about what that sports club all was.
he just
He built it beautiful.
he liked this. He liked that view. From where we lived at the lake, when you came up over the hill, you can see the skyline. You can see the whole thing. And he just had a vision that, because there wasn't any other ski parks around, Skyline was the only other one that was even in infancy. And there was no Nubs Knob and Boyne Mountain and all that. None of that stuff was up north. So he just thought a family recreation thing in the wintertime, which everybody kind of gets cabin fever here in the winter. They needed something to do. And the community really didn't have any building where you could have a party. And so he felt that was the site that he wanted, so he went ahead and built that lodge and
Did he have
put
to
in.
buy all that land from one person? Or was it?
It was a number of people, but some of it was from Carlson. I think there was 2 Carlson brothers involved with some of the property at the foot of the hill. Who owned the top, I'm not really sure. But it was kind of interesting because when he bought, I think it was Elmer Carlson, which was a mail carrier also. He bought the 40 acres where the soccer fields are today. All that was part of it. We farmed part of that at that time. Well, then when he gave it to Core, when he was getting, and it went back over some of the papers, and he had been deeded Elmer Carlson's house.
Oh.
They didn't mean for that to happen. He was supposed to get 39 acres. They were supposed to keep an acre, but it wasn't in there. So he made a new deed and deeded it back to Mrs. Carlson, I think.
Oh.
So, because he knew he didn't buy it,
Yeah.
but it was his legally. I mean, if you wanted to really be nasty, he could have claimed title to that thing. So that was kind of, they didn't have as good a title search and stuff then, but back when he bought all that stuff. But it was quite an operation. I mean, any event, a town event, the New Year's Eve party, the what they call the Sitzmark Stomp was a winter carnival thing where they had a queen in the court and all that stuff. And everybody went there. I mean, that was the place. And I remember when I was still in high school, they had a New Year's Eve party, and it was 59 below zero.
Oh my.
And I had Dad owned a little Cleatac bulldozer, and I was using that to keep the driveway clean because it was snowing a little bit. And I had to push the cars to start them, and I would push them out on, they wouldn't turn over. Or if the motor would start, the wheels wouldn't go around because the grease and the differential on the transmission were so heavy. So I'd push them out on the road, down, and push them down the hill, which was a gravel road at that time. And by going down that hill, they would get enough traction that pretty soon the wheels would start turning the way they'd go. But 59 below, when you open up the door, that night I can remember opening the door, going into the dining room part of the lodge, and it would just be a white cloud of frost went in with you.
Like that. Oh my God. Isn't that fun?
That was cold.
I guess so. So when you were in high school, is that when the toboggan runs were there and everything?
Yep.
How many toboggan runs? Was it just one train?
Well, it was built up in a built-up raised building, and the building was like 2 stories or high, so that then the ramp came out of the 2nd story, so you got a little extra boost going. That was down. It wasn't right where the site was at. It was down the road just a little ways on that trail road, and then it just went pretty well down to where that farm's at. It was kind of designed like the Grayling one, with a actual chute, to where there was board sides on it, and what you could ice that down, and then so the toboggan had to stay in online so people wouldn't get hurt and whatever. But it was a heck of a walk back up there. So, and try it a couple times, I have. And that's why he got into that railroad car thing.
Tell us about the railroad car.
Just the people were having it, I mean, it was a tough walk.
Yeah.
Had one rope tow for the skiers, but there was a number of other areas where the skiers went on cross country and whatever, and then they couldn't get to the tow, and so he built that train thing with a car or so on the back of it to pick up the tobogganers. They'd wait at the bottom of the hill, load all the stuff on the toboggans and skis and whatever, and haul everybody back up the top of the hill so they could.
Go out on the road and
Right.
haul them up.
Yep.
Did you work there a lot?
Oh yeah, and just that. It was your
Everybody was
job
there.
to do. If you were the old man's son, you worked wherever he told you to. So.
Well, tell us about this car that he built. He built this himself, or he had his guy?
Yeah, I don't know where he got the idea, but he always had ideas, and so bought this Willys Jeep. I went over and picked it up someplace by the police post in Houghton Lake, and drove this thing home, and all it had on it was a seat and a motor and a steering wheel. And I mean, thank God it was
1952?
about then. Some of these dates I'm not positive
But
on, but
approximately.
it's about that, because I was just graduating from high school, or in that era.
What year did you graduate?
52.
52, okay.
And so we bought it in the machine shop right here next to the office, and then between the carpenters and our tin knocker and whatever, they made a body for it and shaped the round aluminum metal on the front and riveted it together, and whatever, and then added the seats and all the stuff, welded up.
You think they made the seats?
No, because they were like molded, but they were wood, but they were like contoured and stressed, so that they had to be manufactured through a press or something. They were like and I'm not sure, but what he'd done some restaurant stuff, and I don't know, we got involved with the Northern Drug downtown, and like it just seems to me like the booths that were in that restaurant are the same kind of seats that are on that train and cars. No, they were contoured, so it wasn't like a bench. It was a pretty comfortable seat. But it served its purpose well, and then with this.
And the base of the trailers.
It was just an Evinrude boat trailer that Doug Allen and Frank Bertle, which was the Ford dealer in town, and Doug was his son-in-law, married June Bertle, sold Evinrude products.
Oh.
And
At the Ford dealership?
yeah, somehow kind of a side thing, but bought a couple of those Evinrude boat trailers. Oh yeah, and then built the bed on that, and the seats, and the plywood fronts, and all that kind of stuff. So
that's neat.
it was just I don't know if there was even a sketch for this thing, or just kind of wing it as you went.
But they had fun building it.
Oh yeah, the shop was heated, and it was winter time, and things were slow out back anyhow. So.
And where did they get the motor then?
Well, the motor came with it was ordered. It had to be ordered by.
Were we talking about the train yet?
Yes, just that.
Oh, the engine, because the engine wasn't from the.
Oh yeah, you could order whatever. That was.
It didn't go to the Jeep though. It was a different kind of engine.
No, it was just a Perkins diesel, but that was available through the Willys dealership.
Oh, okay.
You could order it with you could either order a gasoline powered or a diesel powered, and Perkins happens to be, or at that time was one of the, built in England, and it was one of the best diesel engines that was on the market. So we didn't really know or pay any attention to that. That's just the way it was. But after they'd say, who built this engine in this thing? And I'd say Perkins, and they said, God, that's really a nice engine. So, and it gave a lot of years of service.
Oh, I thought that the engine did not come with the
Oh no,
Jeep
it was just, it was all together.
It was in the.
It was ready to drive
Jeep
when I picked it up. Oh yeah.
Oh, okay.
I drove it home
I
from.
had that wrong in my head. Okay, very good. Okay, well, we did a little bit of the bank, and so the Pioneer Hill Ski and Sports Club, then he hired, or family people ran that in the wintertime, then what was it in the summer?
Well, Alma Beatway was the cook out there for years and years. I don't know if she worked at the school for some years, and then she was a heck of a cook, and she ran the kitchen. He brought
So it was used for weddings and
oh yeah,
banquets and
all
that
kinds of
sort
stuff.
thing.
But then he also brought I think they call them displaced families at that time from Europe. I don't know how the contact was made, but I know his name was Hines. I can't remember his last name. But he was a ski instructor and whatever, and so Dad moved their family from Europe to here and provided them housing here, and then he gave ski instructions up there, and so
Can't think of the last name.
I will later.
Okay. All right. Then they stayed here, that family stayed?
Then they moved to Saginaw, and there was a ski park down there that he worked at, and then he worked in in a ski place and whatever, and we lost track of him. But they were here for
Like how many years?
quite a few years.
Was it a going ski place, like 10 or 15?
Well, it started like in 48, 49, 59, 10 years
10
as
years?
a ski park of
Well,
any
yeah.
consequence.
What year did he give it to Core?
75.
75.
Uh,
Give it to the Catholic Church?
he felt he was done with the property, but he didn't want, he wanted it to continue to be something good for the community. So he was going to give it to the Catholic Church through some contact with some lady that lived on Higgins Lake. Well, I was on the school board at that time, and I took him to St. Helen one day just for a ride with me because I was checking out the core and rock operation was in St. Helen, right by the railroad track. And I took him into there and showed him what the handicapped people were accomplishing and how they were being educated, and saw the facility that they had to work in and didn't like it. And, so I said, you got to, why don't you think about this? So that's how he ended up.
Great. So you were very instrumental in that.
Well, that was a big growth time for the school. And when I was on the school board, we did the high school, did a school in St. Helen, remodeled the elementary and middle school, got rid of the one downtown, and there was a lot of stuff going. And then the core thing was all, it was all an intricate part of the educational system. And he realized the value that those people deserved, a chance to do better.
Sure.
And it's worked out perfect.
Beautiful. Yes, it certainly has. It certainly has.
So,
Did you say you were a teacher at
no,
one point? No. So you came in the 5th grade. Then
right.
where were you going to school then? All the school was in the brick building in town?
The craft center,
How
yeah.
did you get there from out at DeWitt Landing?
Well, we had a school bus,
You got a bus already?
right, and then in fact, Squire Mead was our bus driver for years and years. He was also the mayor of town once, and the Mead family has been a big part of this community. He was the mechanic at the bus garages right across the street, from you guys. And then also, as soon as we could look like we might be old enough to drive, we drove, and we had a Jeep, and we could take the back roads to town. We were probably 13 years old, no more than that. And then it was just like Jerry and John, the 2 younger brothers, and we'd take the back roads to town. And the reason for that was because then when we got out of school, we had to come here and clean the mill and stack firewood and do chores. The old man had this all figured out, is saying, you can drive to school, but then you're going to drive home by the way of the workshop. So, but a lot of kids were driving then that didn't have a driver's license.
What kind of car did you have? Oh, you said a Jeep.
I think a Jeep, and which was.
Did your mother drive?
Oh yes, she drove from Pontiac. I mean,
yeah,
she's the one that brought us back. Dad kind of just came and went, and Mother was up here with us all
You
summer.
Came all summer for the whole
Right,
summer.
and then Dad would go back and forth to Pontiac yet. So
Let's get back to your dad's hunting interest, because it sounds like he was a really big hunter.
he loved to hunt. I mean, he took me hunting for a couple years before I could get a license. but he says, you know, you're old enough to have a gun, so come on, we're going to go hunting. And so, and we went out in the oil fields, and we went all over heck, and we'd see. There was a doe season in there, I remember, and people were slaughtering deer. That was really a bad hunting season. People were just shooting, and leaving them. A lot, you know, if they shot two, you know, they were only supposed to have one, so they'd leave one. Well, we'd pick those deer up if they're a couple days old, and they were getting pretty ripe. But that was his butcher skills, and he'd bring them in here, and we'd salvage something from them. And so some of them wasn't a pretty sight, but it worked, and nobody died, so nobody even got sick. But then he'd come to our cabin. A group of us from here with my two brothers bought a cabin in Lewiston for our hunting cabin, and he'd come over there. We bought that in 1970. That would have put him at 76 years old, and he was there at 5:30, and we didn't get up till 6. Now he'd already had an hour or better of driving and whatever at that age, and he'd stay right up till supper. And he wouldn't stay overnight with us because he didn't want to curtail our activities with the movies and whatever we were going to have going on. So then he'd drive back home, and the next morning he'd be back up there.
He was a good shot, I bet.
Very good shot. He was the president of the Pontiac Gun Club, president of the Oakland County Sportsman's Club. Was a skeet shooter, a trap shooter, was a state champion, handicap, was his handicap for trap and skeet. My older brothers always said they never could figure out where he got all the ammunition during the war to continue to shoot. They said he must have shot up a carload of shells when nobody else could buy a box of bullets. They all went to the war effort, but
He was a very ambitious person, though.
He had his routine, but he put in a lot of hours every day. Every night at 6 o'clock we ate dinner, and at 6:30 we were done, and at 6:30 till 7:30 he took a nap, and then worked till 11 o'clock at night, doing something on his garden or yard or something. No, he had a lot of energy.
I guess he did. And very, you'd almost say, philanthropist, I think is the word. Okay, tell us about about the big wheel.
Well, how he ever got a hold of that property, I don't know, but he realized the fact that that was probably the most exposed property to people heading north of any property around, as it was at the junction of the then US 27 and M76, and if you were going to go up mid-state, you had to go by that corner. Everybody I was in the Army with a number of guys, they'd say, Roscommon, we used to go through Roscommon. I said, you ever stop at the Big Wheel? Hell yes. When we went deer hunting, we had to stop at the Big Wheel. Everybody would,
sure,
you know.
Sure.
That was a little gold mine, really.
Who ran it then?
He brought up two cousins from Wyandotte, Reichelderfer and Arnie Malmren, and they were both from my mother's side of the family, and they operated the gas station, whatever, and then he leased out the restaurant part to a number of different people, but they had very good food and whatever. And, you know, I think maybe one of the main things he built that restaurant for is to get the garbage from there to feed his hogs back here, because that was my job, to go up there and get a couple cans of garbage almost every day and bring them back and slop the hogs.
No
Yeah.
kidding. How many hogs did he raise?
There was probably 80 back here at one time.
And that was on the farm at
Right here.
Oh, that was on this farm?
Oh, that was long before that stuff.
Oh, okay.
That farm only
And where
never.
did all this, was all this, the meat then, did that all get sold back in Pontiac?
No.
Where did that go?
That's through the family and some people in town and
Oh, okay.
whatever. Just we only butchered.
How many of you learned the butchering?
Well, my brother Bill was a good butcher. I'm a decent butcher. My dad never thought I was a very good butcher because I butchered to eat and he butchered to sell. There's a lot of difference, as he tried to teach me, is that I can make a cut of meat that is very good to eat, but you're not going to get top dollar out of that if you ran it through the meat counter.
Oh.
You could do better with 2 pieces of that, and there's a whole lot of theory in there that
Sure.
that.
And he was so business-minded that was his...
Yeah,
focus.
he couldn't get that out of his head when it was back here for enjoyment, or for our own personal use. He still had to cut for a profit. And he was a good butcher, and he could outwork anybody.
Whatever happened to all that butchering equipment?
It's all back here, yeah.
No kidding.
There's meat block and cutting tables,
Probably
and
set up a museum.
there's a yard. We rendered lard and made cracklings, and then head cheese and scrapple and all that stuff. Everything was used from the hog except the squeal. That was his theory. And we had a smokehouse out back. He smoked his own hams and cured.
Not to sell? Just
No,
for
just-
you all to use?
yeah.
Well, you had a big family.
Cornelia's in the bakery downtown, and R. Vossling had the market and a bakery on the corner. They just loved when we butchered because they could get fresh lard, good clean lard for their bakery and stuff
Great.
system. And
So he did sell a little bit of it locally?
no, they gave it to them.
Oh, he gave it to them?
Yeah, we did the rendering to get the crackling and make the head cheese and the scrapple. And then the log cabin company was still in operation all this time. These are just little
Sidelights.
side things. The salesman used to come in here, and he always gave them a slab of head cheese and a little piece of scrapple. And some of the guys, my wife was his secretary for a while before, even while we were married. And she'd say there was a couple of those guys just almost hated to come in here because they didn't want any of that stuff.
They were going to receive it anyway.
They were going to get it, and you better like it or you don't get the next order. So.
Wow. Okay, well, let's go on to, he built the big wheel, then eventually sold that too, or what happened to that?
Yeah, it was sold. I forget. Sold it to a guy out of Clare. I had a heck of a time getting our money out of that. In fact, settled for a lot less, and then right now today it's used as the Moose Lodge.
Oh, is it?
Yeah,
Oh,
which
okay.
they had a tough time for a while, but it appears that they're
Making a
doing
little bit now.
very, very good now. So.
Okay, and then let's go on to the Bank Building in Mile. Is that a log cabin?
No,
structure
it was all masonry.
Uh-huh.
But I don't know, he had this vision and feeling that Mile was a good place to do business, and he was so, as one of the biggest stockholders in the bank, he wanted the bank to do as good a job as it could, and he wanted to expand that market, which he talked the bank into expanding in the Houghton Lake and Prudenville area. But they just wouldn't have anything to do with that, and they didn't want to spend the money to build a building, so he built the building and leased it back to them, and it was a gangbusters. It was, it's always been a good moneymaker part of the bank,
We're talking about the Roscommon State Bank.
Right.
This was in 50 and 51. Okay. So tell me a little bit about this, even the Amish people coming.
Well, see, during the Depression, everybody in the Mile and Rose City area, their bank was in West Branch. The bank,
So there was a bank there that was a branch from West Branch?
no, they
There
had to go to
wasn't any
West
there.
Branch.
Oh, they had to go to West Branch. Oh.
But that bank failed during the Depression, as a lot of other small banks did.
Yeah.
And so he felt that that community deserved that. So he did this building, and when they opened up, the people brought their money in and they buried the money. I mean, that was their only, and they hid it in the barn and in the chicken coops and whatever, and they brought it in, and the guys that worked there said, God, there was feathers on the cans and white marks where the chickens had roosted, and it was really, and it just chucked right full of money because they're very frugal people to start with.
Sure.
And good business people. They work hard and don't spend a lot, so it was. So that proved the rest of the board wrong, and he took great joy in that also. So
sure. Well,
I
it's
told
something to
you,
be
I
proud
told
of.
you so.
Yeah, right. And then give us the history of this. Was it the Price building when your father bought it?
Yeah, that
Or
was
what was it?
Andrew Price was.
This was in 52 and 53.
Andrew Price was the county treasurer here for,
Long
if
time.
there is 100 years for a guy, I think it was. I mean, I just could never remember anybody that
Besides-
before him. And he owned that building, and it was I think it was a feed store, mercantile,
Right. We're talking about
general
the building
store.
on Lake Street that is now the Ace Hardware.
Ace Hardware, right, which is the two-story
Part.
part of that building. And then upstairs there was a pool hall, and there was a side stairway that went up the side towards the riverside. Went up
Outside, you mean?
outside to gain access to the pool room upstairs.
Oh, okay.
It's a huge room upstairs. It's a big wide open space with with nice wooden floor and whatever in there. So I guess they pretty well closed down, and so Dad just had this idea again that
Was Mr. Price still alive then?
I think Andy was. I'm not. Andy lived till a ripe old age. I'm not sure, but Andy lived right up the street from you guys, where
Or Darlene?
Arlene and Dave live. That's a Sears house. Was bought from Sears in a package, and so he bought that little restaurant next door, and Cornelius, who were friends of his in Pontiac, wanted to move up here, and he hunted some with Art, so he built them a bakery and an addition on the store and filled that block up that way. And
So the restaurant, there was an open spot between the restaurant and Price's building,
yep,
and that's where they filled in with the bakery?
right.
Oh, okay.
That was like the bakery in between there was kind of a freestanding building.
Uh-huh.
The Roscommon State Bank was on the corner, which,
The brick building.
yeah, my brother Jerry and I owned that for a lot of years. But that was the original Roscommon State Bank. And
Well,
so,
it's the one they built, it wasn't the first one. According to Percy's history, the first one was where the El Sabo drugstore is now. Yeah, we have old pictures
Okay.
from the 1880s.
right, okay, but that was the first,
Not 1880s, earlier than, it was 1900 something.
yeah, okay. But it became
But I know where,
the
right,
the Roscommon State Bank
Right.
before they moved to on the corner down where
Right.
where the Bank One is at now. And so that he just kind of filled between the two buildings, built an addition onto the Price building, and then
the
a
restaurant
separate,
was there.
right.
The little restaurant was there already, there's beers.
Well, but it was there, then he tore that out of there. That was
Oh, okay.
demolished.
Oh, okay.
that wasn't, wasn't incorporated into this thing. I mean,
Oh,
everything
yeah,
that's there is
okay.
masonry now,
I see. So he filled in where the restaurant was and the empty spot and made
Right.
the bakery.
Right.
Wow. Boy, it would be nice to have a bakery now.
Oh,
So then Art,
people would die today to have Eloise and Art baking for them. I'll tell you, they had a beautiful bakery.
did they really? Wow.
They ran a bakery in Pontiac. That's how Dad knew them from down there. So
Sure. Then your father opened that building as a furniture store.
yep,
Called the Price Mart.
named it the Price Mart, which took Andy's building,
Kept it.
but Mart was
Right.
the
But Andy was not part of that anymore then?
no.
Okay.
And then my brother Jerry managed that from very young, really, probably 1955 or something. He didn't graduate till 53. He went to college 1 year, I think, and then started running that for Dad and worked there for a long, long time. And in fact, then he started, and there was a mezzanine in there, and he started the credit union for which is now the credit union there. And then when we bought the building from NBD, that still had teller cages and what in there, and so he moved the credit union into that part, and then it operated there more like a bank, then, and then moved to where they're located at now. And but that store did a very good business in furniture and.
When did it become a gambling store?
Oh boy, I don't know, but
Is that after Jerry
Oh yeah.
sold it? Did Jerry sell it then? Or
No, Jerry never owned it.
your dad sell
It just that I guess Van Dries and those things started taking over to where, and Jerry moved to Saginaw to run a credit union. He was involved in credit union, so he didn't want to be part of the furniture store anymore. So I think that's pretty well why it just shut down, and then had the gamble store in there for a while, and then then we sold it to. We got it back from that. Sold it to Dave and Sandy Myers and.
Oh, so the DeWitt still owned it when David
Can-
Myers bought it?
Kenny Hellebuck and his wife, and then they changed it into the hardware store.
Yeah, they were very successful,
I think we're very lucky to have. That's a heck of a hardware store for this little town. I'll tell you that. The stocking and stuff and those guys put in there is they do a good job, I think.
Yeah. Okay, let's move on to the Catholic Church that your father had a hand in building.
Well,
Just
see, my
one
dad
or
was a
two.
convert. He
What was
been
he
raised a
brought up?
Protestant. I don't know.
Oh,
I don't
not
think anything.
Catholic.
But her family was Catholic, and of course when they got married, it was in the Catholic Church. And then, a convert to Catholicism is a different animal altogether. I mean, they seem to have a more intense love. And he was a Catholic, I'll tell you, and he'd do anything for the church. He thought that was heaven. Yeah,
Sure.
he's buying his way to heaven. But anyhow, the little wooden church that was on the corner that wasn't adequate anymore, and I think Father Grill came here and said, we got to have something more. He agreed, and away we went. And that was our first timber building.
Oh, it was?
Yes. I mean, we were still in the the round log business, but that just wasn't fitting for that for the community, for a church.
Okay, so they wanted a new church.
Right, so he made some contacts in British Columbia out there to get the redwood timbers, and that was our first exposure to timber work. It was quite a project to start from
Oh, I bet
that
it was.
type of construction from scratch. And he designed those trusses, and he had a little model there's one around here someplace of how to stress those trusses in that building, and it was quite a work of art at that, and of course now it's expanded. And who was Father John? Yeah, Father.
Correct.
He was here, and he and I talked a lot, and I did some remodeling there for him. Made one of those side things into more. It used to have columns in the middle of the side rooms. I took one of those columns out, restructured the upstairs so that it could span that full opening, and did some other things. And Father John and I got along just great, which he was a great guy. And then they got into the idea that they needed to expand this church, and so. And I talked to him about how it was constructed and this and that and the other thing, and he said, I got to talk to my committee to see if you can be on the building committee with us. He said, I need you. So 'cause he came out here and talked to me a number of times. So then he went back to the building committee at the church, at a church meeting, and they said, Tom doesn't go to church, he can't be on the committee. And so he came out here, and he was madder than hell. And he said, "Oh, dummies, it doesn't matter if you go to church or not. You're smarter than all of them." So, but they wouldn't let me. But he and I helped him to say, "Here's what you can preserve and whatever." And I think they wanted to gut a lot more of it than they did, and he wouldn't let them. So it's
So
at
you
least
had a big influence anyway.
at least it stayed. The nucleus of that thing is like it used to be. So
Okay, so what happened to the building that was there when this timber one was to be built?
well, it was moved a couple times in town, down towards Beatway's house first, and then over by France's car sales, which at that time
Fifth Street.
was by
Griffin.
McWilliams's barber shop and whatever. And then it went out
Was
on.
it just vacant there, or did someone use it for something?
Caroline, I can't really, I
It's
can't
okay, I'm
remember.
just trying to
During some of this period of time, I was out of town too,
Yeah.
maybe,
Yeah.
And but then I ended up, I'm positive, out on Oakwood by the high school, someplace out there.
We'll have to research that.
I'm gonna take a ride out there, and I would recognize it if I could see it. I know it was there at one time. Whether it's still existing, I'm
So
not
it
sure.
probably was used as a private home out there.
Yeah,
Had to be.
I think it was storage and maybe a garage even. I'm not sure.
Okay. And then he built in St. Helens.
Yeah, he had a few friends, and of course the bank moved into St. Helens, and there was the post office was, I guess, almost non-existent down there, and so he built a building across from where Bank One is at today. It's a masonry there's a little bit of timber work. Everything we've ever done has got some timber work or something in it. And there was a beauty shop in there and a post office, and that was the post office for a number of years before they moved across the street down towards railroad tracks a little ways.
And what about the Elkson?
Well, you know, he was a dyed-in-the-wool elk. You know, he loved the elks. And I think all of those organizations used to do more work for the community, within the community service type stuff than they do today. And he liked the camaraderie and what they stood for and whatever. So he talked them into starting back. They'd failed, I guess. I'm not sure of some of, but they weren't functioning as a lodge. So he made it possible for them to meet and use the part of the sports park for
at Pioneer Hills
for a lodge room, for a meeting room, and whatever. And then during that period of time, I know that date's pretty close because during that period of time I turned 21, and on the day after my birthday I became an elk because the membership was going up, and so I was going to help that. And then he got with the business guys in Houghton Lake that that's where it should have, you know, it was their lodge really. And then again, he talked them in and helped them buy what they called a Houghton Lake Hospital, which was probably a health clinic more than a hospital. But it was like a two-story building on the property where the Elks Lodge is at today.
Which is on the lake.
It's on the lake, yes. Nice piece of property. And again, he said, now I'm going to Florida, and so here's what you're going to do to remodel that thing, and he left town.
You got to do that.
And here I was the young guy on the block, and all these businessmen and Elks guys in Houghton Lake, they knew. A couple of them I got along with, and they went to bat for me, but some of them said, you know, what the hell's that kid doing running this job? But it got done, and it served well until they were in a financial situation to do bigger and better things, which they have done. But he loved them, that Elks thing. He always had a car lot. He'd make sure he'd go through town and pick up 3 or 4 of the Elks and make sure they made it to the meetings and stuff. Right. So
it's just amazing what all he did, isn't it? Just amazing.
He had a lot of energy.
Yeah. Okay, let's go on to the Wooden Cross and Indian River. Where did those timbers come from?
They came from like British Columbia or on the West Coast someplace, but most of that timber stuff came from British Columbia, and I don't know why. But Father Grill was the pastor here then, and he had some kind of a relationship with the priest at Indian River, and they had this dream of a chapel in the woods and thought, you know, and they had a smaller idea for a cross than it ended up, but I think that's how it came to life. And so they contacted Dad, and he said, that's a great idea. So we were buying carloads of timbers at that time that we were using in the business. So he had some really good contacts out there. And I know the company that he bought that came from Seattle, which I think still had a logging operation in British Columbia possibly, which would be on the border there anyhow. And that, I think the main log is 56 feet long, the upright, and the vertical, or the horizontal, the cross eye is like 32 foot long or something. It all came out of one tree. And
so that's redwood.
That's all redwood. And I had a picture, and I don't know what's happened to it, of the stump. There was like 8 guys standing across the stump where they'd cut this tree down, and then there was no sawmill that could handle that, so they squared it up with saws, I guess 2-man chainsaws or whatever. I'm not sure how they did it, but it came in on a car. I got a picture up there of it after we unloaded it off the railroad car. And then we worked on it through the mill and had to come up with some really ingenious handling things to turn it over and to handle it, and then shipped it up there and
How did you get it up there?
trucked it up with like a pipe hauling trailer, which is just a piece of pipe with a bunk on it, and behind a big truck, and
That was in 54 and 55.
yes.
Okay.
Well, I think it was actually constructed like in '56, but
So did your crew actually put it upright and install it and all that?
well, not really. They had to get a crane from Roy Milliken.
They were helping to do it.
Yeah.
though.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
But Roy Milliken, which was up by Grayling, in part way up to Grayling, he had a crane, and so he worked with it and worked on it. But when they got it up there, they couldn't get it up because his crane wasn't big enough. They had to bring a crane up from Chicago to set this thing. That was the closest place to find a crane that was big enough with a big enough boom to set that thing up,
Wow.
because it's on a knoll to start with.
Yeah.
So I stopped by there a couple years ago with our neighbors from Florida. I was showing them around some stuff, and they painted that thing gold, and it looks like hell.
Okay.
It doesn't.
Well, is the Statue of Christ still on it?
Yeah, that came as an after thing. It was built just as and then the priest up there was more of he went to some commercialized Christian idea and could market it better with a crucifix on it. Didn't need to, but
Originally, it was just going to be the cross.
it was just the cross
Yeah.
for a while, and then they put the thing on it.
Wow, that's something and your father probably contributed that.
Well, I looked because there's credits, and I picked up a brochure. There's credits for everybody else to build that except him.
Okay.
And what really ticks us off, and we tried to get them, and gave them proof and photographs and everything, and it's never changed.
No kidding. Wonder
It's
why.
like, no, these are the guys that did this. And there's no mention of Roy DeWitt or Pioneer Log Cabin Company or Roscommon or nothing.
Wow. Well, that's something.
So, which is okay.
Well, sure.
He's in heaven. He doesn't need to buy any more space anyhow.
That's right. But,
But I
I
always, during that process when we were trying to, I was looking for a payment, and I went through all of his ledgers and whatever, and I never could find where there had been an invoice or a receipt for anything up there. So I just assumed that was just another one of those things.
Yeah. Well, let's go. So we're in Indian River. Let's come down to Grayling now to the shot in the gun. 1959.
Again, I don't know why he got into that thing. I mean, his only experience with a restaurant had been at the Big Wheel, but somehow or another and we did quite a lot of business, built quite a few cabins around, and knew a lot of people in the Grayling area.
How many
And
of your
whether-
cabins do you think are on the river?
How about 100 or I don't know. I mean,
Has
they're
to be
all
a lot.
over
Yeah.
Carolina. After in that many years, there has to be.
Yeah,
I mean,
sure.
but anyhow, he brought it from the Trudgeon family, Roy Trudgeon, and I forget who else, but and it was pretty well run down and very outdated and whatever. And, had a little unattached bar next door that wasn't much.
And then people had to go out and around?
Well, yeah, the hotel, they didn't, I think they had a little lunchroom. They didn't have much facilities. It was basically a lot of loggers stayed there and a lot of the railroad people. That was a big railroad terminal, and I know that a lot of the rooms were, I mean, they were nasty. You know, maybe 8 by 12 foot rooms. I mean, squeaky wooden floors, and it was a job.
And you gutted the whole thing?
Took,
Top to
oh
bottom?
God, oh yes,
Okay.
and
This was in 1959.
yes, like I said, that was right after I got home from the Army, and the old man says, here's a job for you. So I'm going to Florida, and so, but out behind there was a, and we had, you know, had the ideas of what we wanted to do, and wanted to put an addition on it and expand some rooms upstairs, and so that we can change the hallway so we can make the rooms bigger and whatever. And there was what they called the annex out in the back parking lot, which he built a parking lot back there for his people with meters and the whole thing, because there wasn't enough city parking
Your dad did?
to provide adequate parking for that facility. And so and that had a basement in it. And it was just a ratty, and that was a lot of skiers stayed there. When they come up on the tours, on the ski tours from the train, and they'd drop them off in town, and then they had a shuttle from there out to the Grayling, which is Grayling Sports Park, which is Hanson Hills now. They would stay in this annex, downtown Grayling. Well, it had a basement in it. You know, it was a ratty kind of a old wooden building. So we tore that thing down and just dropped it into that basement and burned it. Told the town fathers what we were going to do, and set this thing on fire, and it did it blaze. Holy moly!
Do you have pictures of that?
No, I wish I, you know. None of us were. Dad used to take a lot of pictures. And then there was a period there that there's just not many pictures. But so we had a place to put all the debris that we tore out of the hotel, because it was all lath and plaster and all that. I mean, it was a mess. But it worked out really good, and it was a very good business for a while, well run, and it was managed by our cousin Arnie Maurin, because the gas station was at the Big Wheel was shutting down, and that business didn't need two people down there. I think the other partners stayed and operated that, and Arnie operated the hotel for the old man for a lot of years.
So did he still have that when he died?
No, he'd sold that to Theron White, who they own the building today. They'd sold the building. He was from Perrington, Michigan, had a propane gas business and a farm store. That's down by St. John's. And Theron did some nice improvements up there within the same, just kind of fixed up what we'd already had there. And then when he died, the two daughters sold it to the people who own it today. And then they thought it needed a lot of, so they did some really extensive remodeling and kitchen work and whatever. And instead of just trying to make some money first, you know, it's not operating because,
Yes, it's not currently
and it's terrible. That's, you know, but in my opinion, if they'd have just ran the damn thing, it was adequate like it was, but it wasn't good enough for them. Now it's good enough for nobody. So it's too bad. It really is, because it was it had a good reputation. And
Okay, and other projects you have in your little written thing here is the subdivisions.
Now, there's a number of subdivisions, you know,
Yeah.
I didn't want to go into a bunch of detail on those, but where I live out there, you know, River Forest is a nice subdivision.
Oh, yeah.
And that developed over a lot of years, and he and I owned part of that together, and whatever. And I moved out there. I was the first resident out there,
And what year was that?
1960, when Nancy and I got married, and then.
Had he had that property for logging purposes originally, or
No, just he.
investment or whatever?
Carl McNamara owned some other people owned some, and he just accumulated it, and again, why I don't, you know, and he never really, he never asked anybody's permission before he did this stuff. Yeah, he didn't have to.
Maybe your mother.
I doubt if she knew until the bill came. Maybe you know, he didn't care. I mean, he always did well, and you know, there's got to be trust.
Sure.
So, anyhow, and I maintained the roads, and we had private roads for a long time, and then I finally got sick and tired of all that stuff. I did that for years and years. I had to